why we change blades on the saw. Number one reason we change blades, we've changed the material that we're using. So if we're using a different material, we have to have a blade that is appropriate for the material. For instance, if we're just we're taking a 2x4 and cutting it in half from Home Depot or whatever, then we want to just use a combination blade. Okay? This is a combination blade. You'll notice that there's a very large, this is called a gullet, and then there are smaller gullets. Each gullet collects the shaving of the tooth as you cut the wood. Now, if we're cutting with the grain, you can anticipate very large shavings. Therefore, you need a large gullet. Okay? If you're cutting across the grain, then you can get away with a smaller gullet. But I would recommend, I would offer to all of you that a lot of teeth, this is 120 tooth on a 10-inch blade, a lot of teeth is meant for composite materials. Melamine, MDF, chipboard, like that, plywood, okay? Whereas these are meant for solid woods. Okay, so composite material, small particles. You can think of it that way if you want. This is going to have large chips, large sawdust. This is going to have tiny sawdust, so it doesn't need the same size gullet. It can load up, but the gullets can handle it because it's all small tooth. Now you'll notice that a lot of these newer blades have a little cut in them, and that is for noise and vibration. It pulls the noise and the vibration out so that the resonance doesn't get set up in the perimeter of the blade and create more noise. And you'll notice that we're getting very sophisticated with lasers now cutting. This pretty fancy little curlicue in there. That's cut with a laser. And they don't have to come back and trim it or anything else. It's just that good. So this has very large gullets. I want to point out that both of these blades are meant for rip. But if we were to look at the angle of the attack of the tooth, if you can look at that, the blade in front has a pretty steep angle. And the blade in my right hand or behind is a pretty shallow angle. Okay, this kind of rakes it out of your board. This one actually cuts it cleanly. And this is that special blade that we talked about. It's marked right here, special. The idea was that this has a much steeper rake on the tooth and it cuts a lot cleaner for nice hard woods. So this blade is capable, when it's sharp, when it's set up perfectly, of making a cut on your wood that does not have to be jointed. It is now prepared for glue. Okay, so that saves you a step, and that also saves you a bit of material. Not a lot, but a bit. So we have many different blades in here. Here's a blade that's just been sharpened. It's got a wax around the edge. And so that indicates that that has been to the shop to get sharpened. And if you want to use it, it would work very well for you. Nice clean edge.
You don't have to clean that stuff off.
Oh yeah.
You have to take the wax off.
You got to take the wax off, of course.
You melt it up? Or
Well, you're not going to get a cut that way. It wouldn't make a lot of sense to not take it off, so it just pulls right off. It's real easy. It's actually easier than getting wax for hair. So any of you have gone there.
It doesn't hurt.
Yeah, it doesn't hurt. No.
Sounds like voice of experience.
No, my wife tells me about all the time.
I've seen it on TV. He screamed every time.
Okay, so multiple teeth, more teeth when you're getting over, let's say, 80 or 90 teeth for a 10-inch blade. You're talking about composite material, your glued up materials, melamine, MDF. Now, again, the same thing. If I can, I'll show you the difference here. These two blades are both meant for composites, and they're fairly close, but there is a little bit of difference in the angle of attack of the tooth. And the idea was a while back, actually about 20 years ago, that a shallower tooth was less aggressive, and it would not chip as much on the sides. I'm sure you've all experienced that chip. There's two things going on if there's chipping going on. One is you're feeding too fast, or you're blade's dull. One of the two. There's a third thing that can help you out, and that is how high you have the blade set. If the blade is just penetrating through the top, you have to look at how that relationship is. And you can see that the tooth is not really pulling down so hard, but if I'm cutting this way, then I've got this tooth going almost straight down. It's more likely to chip. Okay?
Speaking of that, when you're setting your blade depth, what's your rule of thumb? How much should you have sticking up above?
I have just a 1/16 of an inch. That'd be about it. Kind of depends though, you know. If there's a lot of different variables. If I'm ripping wood that has a potential to collapse on itself, it's warped or twisted, so on the back side of the blade, it's going to want to try to grab the blade, then I'm going to have a higher, the blade's going to be higher. Because as it's coming through, rather than lifting the board straight up, it's going to be throwing it that way. And you can look at some of those lockers back there and see how hard the board gets thrown. Okay, so the idea is if the wood is really wet, or if there's a lot of twist or inherent warp in it, then you probably want to have your blade very high. That way, if it's going to grab it, it's going to grab it and throw it up rather than at you. Okay? So, what else do I want to say about this? Multi-purpose, great for ripping, but you're going to have to treat the edge. You're going to have to run it through the jointer or the planer to get a nice edge for gluing purposes. Okay, and also a combi, which is typically what's in here. I think that saw stop, it could be said it's a combi. It's more of a rip. But it'll also cut cross grain, okay, on hardwoods. Now, the same thing applies. If you're having difficulty on the bottom of your cut when you're cutting cross grain, you're feeding too fast, there's some rubbing going on, so you're not perfectly set up square and parallel to the blade, or the blade is dull. One of those factors is going on. It may well be that you have to support it better as well. You may have to have a sacrificial piece underneath it to support that edge. So when the teeth are coming through, it's supported right there. And that happens a lot in routing. You have to do that in routing. You have to do that when you're doing dado cuts like Warren was doing right there. Sometimes you have to have a sacrificial if you don't want tear out. So we should all be aware of that. Any questions? Okay. I will say this. There's a lot of people think it's a pain in the butt to change these. And if you're coming in here for 1 or 2 cuts, I would agree. You maybe don't need to do that. But if you're coming in here for a project that you want to achieve a nice quality, then you should be adjusting the equipment that you're using to the project itself. So that would require that you change the blade out. And initially it's a pain in the butt, but over time you get accustomed to it, it becomes easier and easier. So start doing it now. Okay?
You could use any of these blades on this.
All of these blades that are within this, which is in that drawer right there underneath the chop saw, they're all available. Okay? Please use them appropriately.
And they could be used on the saw stop as well.
Yes.
And a word about that. They're not all exactly the same diameter. So when you put them on the saw stop, you're going to need to test. It won't run.
What's the chapter that they have to refer to in the manual?
The adjustment chapter?
There are, yes.
It tells you how to adjust.
That's an excellent point, because this blade has yet to be sharpened, so I'm very confident it's 10 inches. This blade has been sharpened a fair amount. I'm fairly confident that it might be 9 7/8. That 1/8 of an inch is going to affect how that works as far as the safety goes. Because picture, the idea of that is to stop this blade, so therefore it has to engage the jam block. If it's 1/8 inch delayed in engaging that jam block, that 1/8 inch is whatever's going to come out from your finger. Okay? So that's why it's important to adjust that.
and it won't run. It'll,
There's
the
another
computer
reason, too.
will check it out. But you do need to, the manual is on top of there. This is the Cliff Notes version, but it's very simple to adjust the brake.
It is very simple. I've done it several times myself, so it's pretty easy.
But be aware that you have to do that. And a word about changing the blade on the saw stop. I don't think you need to turn the breaker off for the saw stop. Turn the computer off. Because that's a double thing. One thing I wanted to mention while we're talking about joiners and gluing. If you're putting together glue joints on the joiner, and you want perfect glue joints, like you're going to glue these two things together. After you've cut the edges on your boards that you're going to glue together, if you want perfect joints to glue, like that. Mark an I on one side and an O on the other side, and run each side through the joiner. This is the outside from the fence. Double check the fence, make sure it's perfect. 90. Check it with your square. Run this through the joiner, outside, this through the joiner, inside. When you put them back together, they will perfectly match, even if it's out a little bit. You've compensated.
Good tip.
Okay. Any other questions?
What's the, I think we use the word policy, but if you change the blade on the saw for your project, is it the expectation that we always put back